In the spring of 1942, the North Atlantic was a battlefield without borders, an expanse of cold, gray water where ships, submarines, and aircraft vanished with unsettling regularity. Few stories capture this silent war better than the disappearance of a Lockheed Hudson from RAF Coastal Command's No. 206 Squadron. It departed from St. Eval on March 21, 1942, on what should have been a routine anti-submarine sweep. Yet within minutes, its presence faded into nothing more than a clipped radio transmission. No distress call. No sighting. No debris. It simply ceased to exist in a region already earning a grim reputation as the Allies' most unforgiving hunting ground. The struggle for control over the North Atlantic had reached a fever pitch. German U-boats, operating in coordinated wolf packs, were taking a devastating toll on merchant convoys trying to supply Britain. Aircraft like the Hudson, fast, agile, and capable of long-range patrols, were essential for breaking the stranglehold. Crews often flew low and slow over hostile waters, scanning endlessly for the faintest hint of a periscope or oil slick. But to fly these missions meant accepting a chilling truth. If something went wrong out there, rescue was far from guaranteed. Even experienced crews understood that one mechanical failure, one navigational error, or one encounter with an unseen enemy could render them irretrievably lost. The aircraft that vanished on March 21 had a seasoned crew familiar with the hazards of Atlantic patrol. In the squadron's operations log, a brief pre-flight note describes moderate winds, intermittent cloud, and fair visibility, conditions well within acceptable limits. The Hudson lifted off at 7:40 hours, tail number AM 735, carrying 4 men whose routine banter reportedly belied the tension of their mission. At 7:58, the pilot sent a standard position report. It contained no hint of difficulty. It was the last anyone would ever hear from them. Investigators later studied German naval records from the period. Several U-boats were known to be operating in the patrol zone that day, including U-332 and U-373. Their logs recorded no direct encounters with Allied aircraft at the time of the Hudson's disappearance, yet analysts noted that U-boats typically only reported engagements they considered noteworthy. A sudden strafing run by an aircraft, or an unexpected dive to avoid attack, might never appear in their reports. Likewise, the possibility that the Hudson spotted a submarine and descended for an attack could not be dismissed. These low-altitude maneuvers were perilous. Many aircraft were lost simply by striking the surface of the sea in poor visibility. More troubling was the absence of any wreckage. Aircraft lost over the Atlantic were notoriously difficult to locate, but St. Eval's command staff expected at least some trace. An oil patch, floating debris, a dinghy. Nothing ever surfaced. Squadron leader Thomas Jarrett later wrote in his diary, "The sea gives up less than it takes." Men vanish between these waves as though swallowed whole. The starkness of that line would echo through post-war histories. As modern researchers examine the case, new questions continue to emerge. Some suggest the aircraft may have suffered catastrophic mechanical failure, possibly involving the Hudson's Pratt & Whitney engines, which were known under certain conditions to overheat. Others propose the crew may have been flying at extreme low altitude when fog rolled in unexpectedly, a common and dangerous phenomenon in the region. Still others consider the possibility of enemy action, from a concealed U-boat anti-aircraft gun to a chance interception by a Luftwaffe long-range maritime patrol aircraft such as the Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor. The Condor, dubbed the Scourge of the Atlantic, operated farther south during early 1942, but German records confirm its presence across wide operational corridors, leaving a window of possibility however narrow. What makes the disappearance so compelling is the eerie precision with which the Hudson seemed to vanish. There was no mayday, no garbled final words, no abrupt end to an unfinished sentence. The crew's last message was calm and routine, an observation that haunts historians as much as it frustrated commanders in 1942. If the men sensed danger, they never voiced it. From today's perspective, with satellite imaging and advanced tracking tools, it is almost impossible to imagine an aircraft vanishing so completely. Yet in 1942, the boundaries of Allied awareness ended where the ocean's mist began. Each sortie was a step into uncertainty, and even the best-equipped crews operated on the fragile edge of survival. The loss of the Hudson from No. 206 Squadron remains one of Coastal Command's most quietly unsettling mysteries. It was not the largest disappearance, nor the most documented. But its silence, the abrupt, unbroken silence, left families, commanders, and fellow airmen with a sense of something unfinished, something unanswered. And in the months that followed, the Allies would confront more disappearances just like it. Some over the Mediterranean, some in the Balkans, some in the vast Pacific. Each carrying a story of skill, courage, and sudden silence, stories that, like the Atlantic itself, seemed to swallow details as effortlessly as they swallowed aircraft. The next of these mysteries would unfold in 1943, involving a U.S. Army Air Force's B-24D over the Mediterranean, an aircraft whose final transmission hinted at trouble, but whose fate remains as elusive as the Hudson's. By the summer of 1943, the Mediterranean had become a crossroads of desperation and opportunity, an air and sea corridor through which the Allies attempted to push deeper into Axis-held territory. It was here, over these deceptively calm waters, that one of the most baffling disappearances of the U.S. Army Air Forces occurred. A B-24D Liberator from the 44th Bomb Group, known for its workhorse reliability and exceptional range, lifted off from Benghazi, Libya, on a clear morning. Its mission, a routine ferry flight toward its next staging area. Its final transmission, a vague acknowledgement of engine trouble, calm and controlled. After that, only silence. Flying A B-24 was demanding even under ideal circumstances. Its Davis wing design gave the bomber remarkable efficiency, but at the cost of stability and maneuverability. Crews often joked that the Liberator didn't fly so much as it negotiated with the air. This particular aircraft, tail number 41 to 24301, had recently completed a series of long-haul strikes against targets in southern Europe. Its crew was experienced, battle-worn, and intimately familiar with the hazards that came with fatigue-prone engines and the relentless desert heat. Yet they showed no reluctance on the morning of their disappearance, a testament to the hardened pragmatism characteristic of airmen in the North African campaign. The Mediterranean in 1943 was no safer than the North Atlantic. German and Italian fighters still patrolled the sky, though in decreasing numbers. Submarines and E-boats prowled the waters. Luftwaffe radar stations in Greece and Crete continued to monitor Allied flight paths, reporting anomalies and opportunities for interception. Even the weather could shift suddenly, turning clear horizons into blinding haze. Every pilot understood the layered risks. But on this particular day, meteorological reports were reassuring. Light winds, stable cloud cover, and no predicted storms along the aircraft's route. Just 40 minutes after departure came the last radio call. It was brief, almost procedural. The number 2 engine was running rough, but the pilot added that the aircraft remained stable and all other systems were functioning. There was no indication of alarm. No request for assistance. At the time, engine trouble in A B-24 was not unusual. Crews routinely nursed declining engines across hundreds of miles, relying on training and discipline. What made this transmission so unsettling in hindsight was not the nature of the problem, but the abrupt end to all communication thereafter. When the B-24 failed to arrive at its destination, a coordinated search began. American, British, and even some Free French reconnaissance aircraft combed the region. They followed possible drift routes, surveyed known Luftwaffe patrol arcs, and examined shipping lanes for any sign of crash debris. Although the Mediterranean was notorious for swallowing wreckage quickly, investigators expected at least a seat cushion, a raft, or a slick of fuel. Nothing surfaced. The sea kept its secrets. The absence of physical evidence forced commanders to turn to intelligence records. One decoded German message from that day referenced radar contact with a 4-engine aircraft heading northwest, though it contained no confirmation of engagement. Italian coastal observers in Sicily also reported unidentified aircraft movement, but their accounts were imprecise, possibly conflating multiple Allied flights. Whether the Liberator had wandered into hostile airspace or been shadowed by enemy fighters remained an open question. Some historians point to mechanical failure as the most probable cause. B-24 engines were susceptible to overheating and lubrication breakdown, especially after heavy use. A double engine loss could make controlled descent nearly impossible. Yet even then, crews typically attempted a ditching maneuver. Survivors or rafts might still be recovered. The emptiness that followed this disappearance defied those expectations. A curious footnote in the squadron's operational diary complicates the story further. A navigator from another aircraft wrote, "For a moment I thought I saw a glint in the water far off our port side, then nothing. Hard to say if it was wreckage, a wave, or just the sun misbehaving. No coordinates were recorded. No confirmation ever came. But it signaled something often overlooked. In the vast Mediterranean, even close observation could be deceiving." Modern analysts have revisited the case using reconstructed flight paths. Some believe the B-24 may have strayed farther east than intended, possibly following a miscalculated heading after the engine malfunction. If so, it may have flown into regions still heavily patrolled by Axis fighters. Others speculate that structural fatigue could have caused an in-flight breakup, scattering debris too widely to detect. A more unconventional hypothesis suggests that the bomber might have attempted a low-visibility ditching and sunk within minutes, quickly enough to leave no surface trace. Regardless of the theory, the fate of the B-24 remains a painful reminder of wartime uncertainty. For the families of its crew, the silence offered no closure, only a lingering vacuum where answers should have been. The Mediterranean, like the Atlantic, held onto its mysteries with an unyielding grip. The disappearance of this liberator echoed through the Allied ranks. It was not the first nor the last aircraft to vanish in this region, but its abrupt silence, paired with a final comm transmission, amplified its aura of enigma. And yet, even as investigators struggled with the unanswered questions, another disappearance, this time involving an RAF Halifax sent on a clandestine mission to the Balkans, would deepen the wartime shadows even further. By 1944, the Balkan theater had become one of the most unpredictable regions of World War II, a patchwork of resistance movements, German occupation zones, and rugged terrain that challenged even the most experienced Allied aircrews. Into this volatile landscape, RAF Special Duty squadrons flew night after night, delivering supplies, weapons, and agents to support the growing partisan resistance. It was during one of these clandestine missions that a Handley Page Halifax from No. 148 Squadron disappeared without a trace, becoming one of the most perplexing unanswered wartime losses in the region. Unlike aircraft lost over water, the Balkans offered vast stretches of land where a crash site should eventually have been found. And yet, for this Halifax and its crew, nothing ever surfaced, not then, not after the war, not even decades later. The Halifax, known for its resilience and heavy lifting capability, departed from Brindisi, Italy, on a clear night in August 1944. Its cargo, containers of ammunition, medical kits, encrypted messages, and food rations intended for a Yugoslav resistance cell positioned west of the Drina River. Its crew of 7 was among the squadron's most experienced, veterans of numerous night insertions. Their mission brief, recovered from squadron archives, included the note, "Drop Zone Fenwick, verified friendly. No known night fighter activity." Yet, in the Balkans, intelligence assessments were often incomplete or outdated by hours. These special duties flights were among the most dangerous, despite their non-combat designation. Crews flew at low altitudes to avoid radar detection, navigating almost entirely by moonlight, dead reckoning, and faint signals from clandestine ground beacons. A single misplaced landmark or cloud bank could send them miles off course. The slightest miscalculation in altitude could bring the aircraft perilously close to mountain ridges. But on this particular night, weather reports indicated calm skies, and the moon cast enough visibility for the Halifax to identify the river valleys that served as navigational anchors. The initial portion of the flight proceeded normally. A wireless operator aboard another special duties aircraft reported standard communication from the Halifax as it crossed the Adriatic. No issues with engines. No warnings of turbulence. No signs of interception. The crew was last heard acknowledging a navigational fix near the Dalmatian coast. After that, radio silence ensued, but on covert missions this was not unusual. Maintaining quiet was essential. Hours later, the aircraft failed to return to Brindisi. When it missed its scheduled check-in, the operations staff attempted multiple radio calls. None were answered. By dawn, the absence could no longer be dismissed as a delayed return. Search aircraft were dispatched along the known flight path, sweeping over coastal regions, mountain passes, and potential crash zones. They flew low, straining to identify any sign of disturbance on the rugged landscape: smoke columns, scorched treetops, broken soil. But nothing appeared. Investigators began compiling possible causes. The first theory was navigational error, a possibility heightened by the challenging topography. Yet this crew was skilled, the route familiar. And while crashes in remote valleys could go undiscovered for days, weeks, even months, they almost always surfaced eventually, especially after the war when Yugoslavia conducted extensive surveys of former battle zones. Another theory considered enemy action. German night fighters, notably the Bf-110 and Ju-88, still operated in scattered pockets across the Balkans. Their pilots were experienced in intercepting low-flying aircraft, and many victims were never able to send a distress call. However, reviewing Luftwaffe logs from the region unveiled no record of an engagement matching the Halifax's timeline. German radar stations in Sarajevo and Mostar also did not report unusual movement. Resistance groups were later questioned. Some claimed they heard an aircraft overhead on the night of the disappearance, flying unusually low. One partisan commander from the Bosnian highlands described the distant drone of a heavy aircraft that faded quickly, although he could not confirm its direction. The testimony, vague and uncorroborated, only deepened the uncertainty. In 1946 and again in the 1950s, British investigators returned to Yugoslavia, combing through wartime records and interviewing villagers near suspected routes. Still, no wreckage was found, an anomaly that plagued military historians. The Halifax was a large aircraft. Even a high-speed collision into mountainous terrain would have left unmistakable traces: twisted metal buried in soil, fragments scattered through forests, or remnants carried downstream in rivers. That not a single identifiable component ever emerged baffled analysts. Modern military aviation researchers have attempted to reconstruct the flight using archived meteorological data and declassified mission logs. Some propose that unexpected downdrafts or early autumn fog may have developed inland, forcing the aircraft lower than intended. Others suggest the plane may have diverted to avoid a German patrol, unknowingly turning into harsher terrain. A smaller set of analysts raised the possibility of friendly fire from partisan groups unfamiliar with the flight pattern, an uncomfortable theory but not unprecedented in the chaos of Balkan resistance warfare. And yet, even with these theories, one troubling fact remains: no one has ever located the wreck. The Balkans, despite their vastness, do not possess the infinite swallowing capacity of the ocean. To this day, the Halifax's disappearance stands apart because it left no footprint, not in German records, not in Allied intelligence files, not in partisan reports. Its loss became a quiet reminder within RAF special duty squadrons of the thin line separating mastery and misfortune. Aircrews continued their missions, aware that even the best-trained teams could vanish between one ridgeline and the next. That sense of vulnerability only intensified as news came from another distant theater, across the endless waters of the Pacific, where an American patrol aircraft, just like the Halifax, would also slip into silence, leaving behind another trail of questions without answers. By late 1943, the Pacific theater had evolved into a vast arena of shifting front lines, long-distance patrols, and relentless naval clashes. Among the aircraft charged with securing this turbulent expanse was the Lockheed PV-1 Ventura, a fast, rugged patrol bomber used by the U.S. Navy for anti-submarine warfare, reconnaissance, and maritime strike missions. Operating out of Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, Ventura crews faced the twin threats of unpredictable tropical weather and the stealth of enemy submarines. It was during one such patrol that a PV-1, flying a routine anti-submarine sweep northwest of the Solomons, vanished without leaving so much as an oil streak behind. Its crew, seasoned veterans of the island campaign, became part of one of the Pacific's most stubborn wartime mysteries. The mission began just before dawn in November 1943. Ground crews noted nothing unusual as they prepared the aircraft. Twin Pratt and Whitney engines running smoothly, radar system calibrated, depth charges secured beneath the wings. The crew of 5 had flown together for months, developing the smooth coordination essential to low-altitude maritime patrol. Their assigned sector lay along a corridor known for enemy submarine movement. Japanese I-class submarines regularly maneuvered through the area to resupply garrisons and stock Allied merchant vessels. Yet on this particular morning, conditions appeared favorable. The horizon was clear, seas calm, and visibility optimal for radar detection. For the first 2 hours, radio logs show standard reporting, grid references, fuel checks, and confirmation of radar sweeps. At 8:12, the Ventura transmitted a brief message: radar contact, possible surface. The tone was controlled, professional. Nothing suggested immediate danger or a malfunction. According to standard procedure, the crew would have descended to verify the contact visually, possibly preparing for a depth charge run. But after that message, the radio fell silent. Controllers at Guadalcanal attempted contact repeatedly. No response came. Search operations began almost immediately. Ventura squadrons typically patrolled overlapping zones, making it possible for nearby aircraft to divert their scan paths. Multiple U.S. Navy vessels, including destroyer escorts, joined the search, probing waters for wreckage or debris. Given the Pacific's conditions, even a catastrophic crash usually produced some trace: floating gear, fuel slicks, fragments of fuselage, or emergency rafts. Yet despite hours of coordinated searching, not a single indicator surfaced. As the day faded into evening, the missing aircraft's trail disappeared into the immensity of the ocean. In the days that followed, intelligence officers reviewed Japanese naval records and decrypted messages for clues. Activity logs from nearby I-class submarines provided little clarity. Some submarines reported Allied air patrols in the vicinity but no confirmed engagements. However, U.S. analysts were cautious. Japanese commanders often omitted minor encounters or incidents considered inconclusive. The possibility remained that the Ventura had approached too close, prompting a sudden anti-aircraft response from a submarine caught on the surface. Another theory involved mechanical failure. Although reliable, the PV-1's engines could suffer from overheating in tropical climates, especially after prolonged low-altitude flight. A sudden loss of power at a critical moment, particularly during a dive toward a radar contact, might cause the aircraft to stall with little time for recovery. But mechanical failure alone rarely erased an aircraft so completely. Even rapid sinking typically left a temporary surface signature. Meteorological analysis added another layer of uncertainty. While conditions at takeoff were stable, Pacific microclimates were notorious for materializing out of nowhere. Pilots often encountered isolated squalls capable of disorienting even skilled crews. A sudden downdraft or wall of rain could disrupt a bombing run or hide the ocean's surface until it was too late. Still, weather stations recorded no major anomalies in the patrol sector that morning. Perhaps the most intriguing lead came from the crew of a nearby destroyer escort, USS Claxton. A sailor reported hearing a distant, muffled explosion around mid-morning, brief, isolated, and impossible to pinpoint. No smoke plume was visible on the horizon. Some officers dismissed it as distant gunnery practice. Others suspected it might relate to the missing aircraft. But without corroborating evidence, the report remained little more than a footnote. In years since, researchers have revisited archived charts, Japanese submarine tracks, and flight logs to assemble a clearer picture. A few believe the Ventura may have detected a decoy echo, a false radar return caused by wave patterns or temperature layers, leading the crew closer to water than intended. Another hypothesis suggests the crew may have engaged an enemy submarine and suffered catastrophic damage in the exchange. Yet the absence of debris continues to challenge all straightforward explanations. The Pacific holds its secrets with a peculiar finality. Unlike the confined waters of the Mediterranean or the complex terrain of the Balkans, its vastness allows even large aircraft to vanish utterly. For the families of the PV-1 crew, the lack of answers was devastating. Letters sent home after the search ended spoke of missing in action rather than killed, leaving hope suspended in uncertainty. The disappearance underscored a harsh truth for Pacific aviators. The ocean was not simply an operating environment, it was an adversary. Crews flew against enemies both human and elemental, and sometimes neither left evidence behind. As the war pressed on into 1944 and 1945, more aircraft would face similar fates. Yet one disappearance near the end of the conflict, involving an RAF Lancaster returning from a bombing raid over Germany, would highlight how even in Europe's final days, silence could swallow an entire crew as completely as the open sea. By early 1945, Europe was burning through its final violent months of the war. Germany's defenses were collapsing, but the skies above northern Europe remained perilous, crowded with bombers, night fighters, flak bursts, and radar shadows that blotted out certainty. RAF Bomber Command, still executing nightly operations deep into German territory, understood that even the final phase of the air war carried deadly unpredictability. It was during this tense period that a Lancaster bomber of No. 514 Squadron vanished while returning from a nighttime raid over central Germany. The aircraft, which had survived dozens of combat sorties, disappeared not over the Ruhr or Rhineland, but over the open expanse of the North Sea, flying under clear conditions. Its loss remains one of the most baffling final-year mysteries of Bomber Command. Lancaster crews lived with the constant tension between routine and danger. Their missions began with pre-flight briefings in cold, dimly lit huts where intelligence officers outlined targets, enemy defenses, and expected weather patterns. The raid on this particular night in March 1945 was directed at railway infrastructure near Leipzig, part of a broader strategy to cripple remaining German logistics. No. 514 Squadron, operating out of RAF Waterbeach in Cambridgeshire, dispatched several aircraft. Among them was Lancaster LM-398, carrying a 7-man crew experienced enough to know every nuance of their bomber's heartbeat, engine vibration, instrument quivers, and the faint hum of onboard radar. The outward journey proceeded largely without incident. Reports from accompanying aircraft described moderate flak near the target area, but nothing beyond what crews had endured countless times before. German night fighter activity had diminished compared to earlier stages of the war, partly due to fuel shortages and partly due to Allied pressure on enemy airfields. Still, the threat remained. No Lancaster crew ever allowed themselves to relax fully, not even on the homeward leg. Just after crossing back over the Dutch coastline, LM-398 made its final routine transmission. The pilot reported fuel levels normal, engine stable, and altitude maintained at approximately 10,000 feet. The tone was calm. There was no mention of damage or engagement. Radar stations along the British coast tracked the formation approaching over the North Sea, noting LM-398's consistent speed and trajectory. And then, in a moment as chilling as it was abrupt, the signal vanished. Ground controllers attempted immediate contact, no response. Other returning bombers were instructed to scan visually for explosions, burning wreckage, or survivors. Nothing was observed. The night sky, unusually clear, revealed no sign of distress. Dawn brought a fleet of search aircraft. The RAF's air-sea rescue squadrons combed vast grid sections of the North Sea. Pilots scanned wave patterns for metallic glints, oil slicks, or life rafts. Despite 2 days of effort, the search yielded nothing. It was as though the Lancaster had been erased. Bomber Command investigators initially suspected structural failure. Lancasters, though renowned for durability, had experienced rare wing spar failures under specific conditions. But these incidents almost always occurred during heavy maneuvering or after substantial damage, neither of which applied to LM-398. Meteorological data showed stable air and calm seas. The absence of a distress call also puzzled analysts. Even in catastrophic circumstances, crews often managed at least a fragmented transmission. Attention then turned to enemy action. Although German night fighter operations had dwindled, records show that several Ju-88s from Nachtjagerschwader 3 were active that night, patrolling sectors just east of the Netherlands. A late-war Luftwaffe tactic, known as Wild Boar, allowed fighters to linger at higher altitudes and pounce on returning bombers silhouetted against moonlit cloud cover. However, no German combat reports from that night mention successfully downing an RAF bomber over the sea. A Luftwaffe document discovered after the war added a tantalizing complication. It referenced radar contact with a large 4-engine aircraft, moving west at low altitude, peculiar, since LM-398 had been tracked at 10,000 feet. Some speculate this contact may have been a different bomber descending, perhaps wounded. Others argue it could indicate a sudden, unobserved drop by LM-398. But the timing and coordinates remain inconclusive. Further theories emerged as intelligence officers pieced through logs. Could the Lancaster have collided with debris, or even another bomber flying in darkness? Night collisions were tragically common, sometimes invisible until too late. Yet such events typically scattered wreckage across large sea patches, making total disappearance unlikely. In more recent years, aviation researchers have proposed an alternative: rapid decompression or onboard explosion due to fuel system malfunction. A sudden structural breach could have caused a near-instant nosedive, driving the aircraft deep below the surface before debris dispersed. Even then, the lack of any floating wreckage remained a sticking point. Families of the crew were left with painful ambiguity. Letters sent by the squadron offered condolences but few explanations. Some relatives continued searching archives for decades, hoping for a discovery from fishing trawlers or oil exploration teams working the North Sea. But to date, no confirmed part of LM-398 has ever been recovered. The loss of this Lancaster served as a solemn reminder within Bomber Command that danger did not diminish simply because victory neared. In fact, the closing months of the war produced their own category of unexplained disappearances, events overshadowed by the scale of conflict yet deeply personal to those involved. And as Allied investigators sought patterns, Atlantic losses, Mediterranean vanishings, Balkan mysteries, Pacific disappearances, and now this North Sea enigma, they began to notice an unsettling consistency. In each case, aircraft disappeared cleanly, silently, without the usual forensic trail. Which led to the final, enduring question: were these isolated incidents, or a broader pattern within the vast and chaotic machinery of global war? That question frames the last mystery in this series, as the war's end forces historians to confront the cumulative silence of hundreds of missing flights, and the lingering traces they never left behind. As World War II drew to a close, the world's attention shifted toward victory, liberation, and the slow rebuilding of shattered nations. Yet behind the headlines and celebrations, another story lived in the shadows, a story of absence. Thousands of Allied air crews never returned from their missions. Some were confirmed lost to combat, weather, or mechanical failure. But others, like the 5 flights chronicled in this investigation, vanished cleanly, silently, and without leaving evidence behind. By the time wartime records began declassification in the decades that followed, historians, investigators, and families were left to piece together fragments of truth from a conflict too vast and chaotic to fully contain. The mysteries of these aircraft, spanning oceans, continents, and battlefronts, formed a pattern that demanded deeper examination. The struggle to understand these losses begins with the nature of wartime aviation itself. In every theater, aircraft pushed the limits of technology and human endurance. Pilots flew at night, through storms, across oceans, over mountains, and deep into enemy territory, often with unreliable instruments, incomplete maps, or damaged equipment. Even a minor error or unexpected threat could become fatal. But what troubled investigators was not merely the danger inherent in these missions. It was the unusual purity of the disappearances. These aircraft left no debris, no maydays, no survivors. Even decades later, as peasants plowed old battlefields and fishermen dredged the seafloor, nothing surfaced. A troubling silence linked these events across time and geography. Wartime diaries and declassified files offer rare glimpses into the mindset of commanders and analysts who struggled with these unanswered questions. An RAF intelligence memo from 1947 noted, "The number of aircraft lost without trace exceeds what can be attributed to poor weather or navigation alone." Meanwhile, a U.S. Navy after-action review bluntly stated that anti-submarine aircraft were vulnerable to abrupt loss when engaging or descending to confirm radar contacts, yet conceded that this did not explain why debris often failed to appear. These documents reveal not certainty, but unease, a recognition that the war's scale masked deeper anomalies. One insight emerged as historians revisited technological limitations of the era. Many of the aircraft that vanished operated at the extremes of their capabilities. The Hudson and the Ventura flew low-altitude anti-submarine sweeps where a misjudged descent could be fatal. The B-24D navigated long Mediterranean routes with fading, unreliable signals. The Halifax relied on moonlit mountain ridges for navigation in the Balkans. The Lancaster, returning over open water at night, faced the constant risk of mid-air collision or structural failure invisible to radar. The environments varied, but the vulnerability did not. In each theater, crews operated just beyond the safety margins of their machines. Yet even with technological shortcomings, questions linger. Why no wreckage? Why no distress calls? A possible explanation lies in the nature of catastrophic failures. Analysts studying historical crash dynamics note that a sudden structural break, fuel explosion, or direct hit during a low-altitude maneuver could send an aircraft directly into deep water, or into isolated terrain, leaving no time for transmission. The Mediterranean and the Pacific were particularly unforgiving. Wrecks could sink rapidly, currents could scatter debris, and storms could erase surface traces within hours. Over land, thick forests or remote mountains could conceal crash sites for decades. But still, total disappearance remained rare. Another angle emerges from post-war interviews with surviving air crews from related missions. Many described the psychological strain of long patrols, fatigue, instrument glare, and the disorienting effects of night operations. One Coastal Command pilot recalled, "There were nights when the horizon simply vanished. You felt like you were hanging in cold ink." Such accounts underscore how even experienced crews faced moments where a single missed cue could bring disaster. But again, missing was not the same as erased. In modern times, researchers with access to digital mapping, sonar imaging, and archival cross-referencing have revisited these unexplained losses. Some sonar scans of the North Sea hint at possible wreck sites too deep for wartime teams to have discovered. Satellite imagery of Balkan forests has revealed crash remnants from other aircraft once thought lost, though none match the Halifax in question. Patterns emerge, but none conclusively solve these specific cases. Instead, each discovery reinforces the complexity of wartime aviation and the vastness of the environments in which these aircraft vanished. A deeper reflection arises when considering the human dimension. To commanders, these losses were operational puzzles. To families, they were open wounds. Letters returned with the phrase "missing in action" provided no closure. Many waited years hoping for news that never came. A Lancaster gunner's daughter once wrote in a post-war memoir, "We grieved not for death but for the lack of proof. It was the absence that haunted us." This emotional legacy, shared across continents, became an often overlooked aftermath of the air war. As historians today revisit these enigmas, they view them not as isolated incidents but as a collective reminder of the war's unresolvable edges. Even with meticulous records, advanced forensics, and modern analysis, the conflict retains pockets of silence, moments where the chaos, immensity, and risk of global war align to erase traces of entire crews. Each of the 5 disappearances explored here, over the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the Balkans, the Pacific, and the North Sea, represents more than a historical footnote. They reflect the fragile line every airman walked, between sky and sea, mission and uncertainty, survival and vanishing. Together, they form a final question that continues to resonate among researchers and families alike. How many more stories remain hidden within the world's oceans, forests, and mountains, waiting for discovery, or fated to remain forever silent? The war may have ended, but its mysteries still echo, carried in the vast spaces where Allied flights ended in silence.